Good morning, fellow alumnus, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome you all to AABN's 88th interactive webinar session. I'm very pleased to see so many of you here on a Sunday morning. We are deeply grateful to our distinguished guest speaker, Dr. Partha, Maitra, President Strategy and Initiatives, Reliance Industries Limited, for having taken time out of his extremely hectic schedule to join us. We are well represented from several domains here today. So to those of you visiting for the first time, welcome to AABN. We have a lot of brain powers here. We have got innovators and investors, business leaders and entrepreneurs. As we move forward to ensure the future of AABN, we will continue to invest in the vast potential inherent in collaboration amongst individuals of varying backgrounds, perspectives, and expertise. I thank you all for keeping a place for AABN in your lives and for your ongoing support. The oil and gas industry is facing extreme pressure to escalate efficiencies and adapt to ever-changing market conditions. From sustainability, helping to reduce the impact of oil and gas operations, to investment in new smart technologies and the growth of digitalization, operators are desperate for solutions and strategies to overcome today's challenges. We are all aware that the dominance of fossil fuels in the global energy mix is set to decline. Many production controls countries are recognizing the need to reduce risk and diversify the energy production and economies. Producing countries need to take advantage of new opportunities to improve energy supply efficiency and revenue while meeting climate targets. There is increasing demand to reduce greenhouse gas emissions in the oil and gas sector. This webinar will discuss the opportunities and challenges in reducing and managing emissions, fugitive emissions, carbon capture and storage technologies, and utilization of associated gas. We have plenty of undeveloped hydrocarbon in the world, enough for centuries more of powering our civilization. But the climate impact of using this resource in the way we currently do is potentially catastrophic. This webinar unites decision makers and leaders from across the oil and gas sector to tackle the dual challenge that the entire industry must face. How do we meet growing global energy demand and simultaneously reduce carbon emissions in the hope for a more sustainable future? Oil and gas companies face a dual challenge to reduce operational emissions. They need to increase both asset performance and life. Dr. Partha Maitra will offer his full spectrum answers to these challenges. In this webinar, Dr. Partha Maitra considers what is driving the growth in energy demand and reviews the multiple sources of oil and gas around the world. I have the pleasant duty of welcoming and introducing Dr. Partha Maitra today at the Future of Oil and Gas in a Sustainable World, an interactive business networking session. Partha Maitra heads strategic planning and long-term initiatives at Reliance Industries. Strategic planning covers business development for new growth projects, including the oil to chemical or O2C transformation at Jamnagar. Long-term initiatives include conceptualizing energy transition and decarbonization for Reliance Net Zero by 2035. Started professional career at Fluor Houston, working on energy conservation projects at ExxonMobil's Baton Rouge and Baytown refineries, modernization projects at BP's US refineries, and the flexi coking project at Shell's Martinez refinery. Prior to Reliance, developed a detailed feasibility report to launch the Mangalore refineries and petrochemicals project. Conceptualized the Jamnagar refineries from its inception, including configuration, optimization, and technology selection. Formulated business planning for margin optimization via crude sourcing and product placements. Developed the SEZ refinery project to make Jamnagar the world's largest refinery. Developed the petcoke gasification and paraxylene train 4 sub-projects for Jamnagar J3. He has a PhD in chemical engineering from the University of Houston, US, MS from the Rice University, US, and BTech from IIT Mumbai. Partha Maitra's achievements and journey, I'm not sure it can all be summarized in the limited time in this session. So without delay, I would like to open the floor to him. So I'm not going to make you wait longer. We'll let Dr. Partha Maitra take over and regale you with his astute experiences and fresh ideas. Once again, a very warm welcome to you, sir. We are truly privileged to have you deliver the speech today. Over to you, sir.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you for the introduction.
And get the thing moving. That is all I am saying.
I am I'm going to talk about the future of oil and gas. And I know there are lots of people in the audience who are in the oil and gas business. So, so before I begin, uh, I want to take your, apologies if there are things which I say you uh, disagree with. So let me tell you how this thing has come about and a little bit of the personal journey for me. So for in around 2018, 2019 beginning, this is long before the pandemic, roughly 3 years ago, I was asked, uh, what do we do with the Jamnagar and our refining business if in the future? And the future was a long-term future. Basically, it was around 2050. So it was what may be called a blue sky planning. And what I'm going to talk today is the summary of what I have learned, what I have understood, and what I have imbibed in this last 3.5 years. So, without further ado, can I see the slides, please?
Yes, sir. It will be done, sir.
And while the slide is coming on, I have to I have to call out NS Murthy, my colleague at Reliance and Jamnagar Refinery. He has been the catalyst for me to come on on this uh, on this program.
Thank you, sir. Good morning to you. It was a pleasure to see you all. Go on, sir.
Okay, so the topic is future of oil and gas, and I'm grateful to AABN, uh, Annamalai Universe Alumni uh, Business Network, for inviting me and giving me the forum to talk about our industry, oil and gas industry in the future. Next slide, please. So this is a disclaimer. Basically, I'm speaking on my own behalf and not representing anything from Reliance. So as long that is understood, we can move on to the next slide. Okay, the structure of the presentation is as follows. So first, I'm going to talk about oil and gas and the legacy of why it has done great things in the world in the last 150 years. Then I'm going to talk about this sustainability issue. That is it sustainable? Can we do the same thing or business as usual in the next 20, 30, 40 years? The third, we are going to talk about the imminent problem of global warming, what it is and what it is going to happen in the near future. Next, I'm going to talk about decarbonization. That is, how do we transition from the fossil or unsustainable energy to sustainable energy without carbon in the fuel in the future. Then we are going to talk about net zero. And finally, uh, we will talk about the future of oil and gas. And this is not the immediate future. This is not tomorrow or next year. This is the future that the the people in the world, the experts in the world, see for oil and gas in the next 30 years. So, and I hope you will find it interesting and exciting while I lead you on this journey. Next slide, please. Okay, so first of all, oil and gas, uh, I mean, historically, it has provided the energy for uh, the industrialization, energy for the masses. So let's talk about the three major fossil energy. Coal, it started the industrial and the electricity revolution roughly around 1850 by the discovery of the steam engine. And so coal is the beginning of the uh, the energy intensity of the economy in the world. Next, we have oil, which came in roughly about 40, 50 years later, and it launched the mobility and the transport revolution. That is basically if you have to move from place A to place B, you have to depend on oil today. And then finally, again, about 40, 50 years later, gas, which was an unwanted byproduct, became the valued byproduct because it boosted electricity, chemicals, and more importantly, fertilizers. Fertilizer is a soil nutrient which allows us to increase the crop yield dramatically. So oil and gas has done wonders in the last century and a half. So basically, it supplied energy to power industries and commerce. Today, everything, the business and industry, uh, they are all dependent on oil and gas. It has boosted the global economy and the GDP. I mean, basically, the global economy today is about $80 trillion, and a large portion of it is because of this uh, energy injection by oil and gas. Because of this development, it has lifted billions out of poverty, and it has transformed the global development index. So oil and gas has been a great boon. So why are we even questioning oil and gas? So that we will cover. But before that, a few statistics in order to quantify my talk. So right now, amongst the total energy, fossil energy is 80% of the total energy input in the world. Oil is the maximum, which is 33%. Gas is second, which is around 27%. And coal is around 20%. The three together total roughly 80% of the energy supply to the world. So it is very, very important. Let's look at the right-hand table. Where is the oil getting used for? Roughly 57% or is used for transport, of which 44% is road transport, that is our petrol and diesel. 7 is air transport, which is the jet fuel. 4% is the marine transport, which is the marine bunker. And remainder residual 2% is for rail transport and inland waterway transport. Petrochemicals actually is not a main user of oil. It is only 14%, so it is a niche application. and that supports the entire global petrochemical industry. Residential and commercial usage for heating is around and lighting is around 11%. Electricity is 5%, and all others for oil is around 13%. Now, let's look at what is the main electricity use is over 50% is electricity. It is not fuel. And the electricity, the maximum in the world, more than one third is used for air conditioning. Around 26% is for appliances, everything, including this laptop, desktop, computers, mobile phones, everything is the remainder 26%. The heating, this is in the cold climate, is 17%. And surprisingly, lighting is only 8%. And incidentally, oil started its life because the world was running out of whale oil, and they had to have a substitute. And oil was a brilliant substitute for lighting the world. And everything others is around 17%. So essentially, oil and gas has fueled the civilization of the world. So today, the civilization as we know it, the major credit goes to energy, and of the energy, the major credit goes to oil and gas. So with that, let's go to the next slide. But it is not, the future is not rosy, though the past has been brilliant. So why oil and gas creates a problem? So coal emits roughly a little less than 4 tons per ton of fuel in terms of oil equivalent. Oil emits around 3.1, 3.15 tons of CO2, again, in terms of, oil is oil equivalent. And gas, again, emits around 2. So though there is a popular perception that gas is not polluting, that is not true. So coal is the maximum polluting, oil is the second, and gas is the third. Now, what is this pollution? It is called GHG, or greenhouse gases. And as per the United Nations, there are 6 greenhouse gases in the world. Now, the major are CO2 and CH4, because it constitutes around 95 to 96%, and the remainder 4 is less than 4%. So let's talk about CO2. It has actually low impact. That means it is a greenhouse gases, but it has a very, very long life. And that is unfortunate because it has a life of close to 500 years. So whatever you are emitting into the atmosphere, not only you, your future 7 generations are going to face the problem of CO2 emissions. Now, CH4 is a more potent greenhouse gas. It has high impact. And how high is the impact? It is roughly 80 times more potent than CO2. But mercifully, it has a very short life. It has around between 15 and 20 years life, and thereafter it decays. So, but both are bad. Methane is bad, and it is related with oil and gas mainly. Of course, animal farming, animal farming or animal husbandry also produces methane. But the biggest impact, which is around 85% of greenhouse gases, is CO2. Methane is roughly around 11%, but that is in CO2 equivalent. So actual methane is a lot less, but when you transfer as CO2 equivalent, it constitutes 11% of greenhouse gas. Now, greenhouse, as the name suggests, acts like a blanket over the earth and it causes global warming. Now, how much have the temperature risen since pre-industrial time? And pre-industrial is arbitrarily set at 1850. It has gone up by 1.1 degree. And you might say that is very, very small. But all the today's problem is caused because of 1.1 degree rise. Now, uh, now what is the forecast for 2100? If we can keep the temperature rise or global warming below 1.5 degrees, we think we will be sustainable. We are facing problems with 1.1. So ideally, there should be no rise. But we can live with and tolerate 1.5 degree rise. Above 2 degrees, the climate scientists are saying it will be completely catastrophic. And right now, the world today, with all the promises made by all the countries, all the companies in the world, is projected to go up to 2.7 degree rise in 2100. In other words, whatever we are doing is not good, not enough. And hence, United Nations has called it code red. In other words, whatever you're doing, we have to stop because the business as usual cannot continue. And we have to go towards energy transition. Now, what is energy transition? It is fossil to renewable energy for mainly power or electricity, ICE or internal combustion engine to EV or electric vehicle for mobility, and fuel to chemicals for refining. So this is the transition from fossil, from ICE, and from fuel, fossil fuel, uh, will lead to sustainability. And the reason we have to do it is simple. Fossil energy, which is 80% of total energy in the world, is unsustainable, unfortunately. Next slide, please. Let's talk about the global warming. Now, already, a lot of us and people in the world are facing the effects of global warming. There are violent storms of cyclones and hurricanes. And what used to be once in 500 years is happening once in 50 years. And the severity of the storm, which happens once in, let's say, 100 years, is now happening once in 10 years. That is the result of the global warming. And why are the storms more violent? Because with warming, you have more energy in the atmosphere, and the storms become more destructive, more violent. Then there is the temperature stress, like heat waves all over the world. Just 20 years ago, I mean, most of the world never saw a temperature above 50 degrees. Now, lot of the tropical zone in in the world are seeing temperatures above 50 degrees. In fact, this year, Delhi had a maximum temperature of 49 degrees, which is a record. Then we have the water stress. Now, global warming causes multi-year drought and flash floods. Now, multi-year drought seems to be and I mean seems to be a paradox, because with higher temperature, you have more evaporation. In other words, you have more clouds, and obviously you should have more rains. But because the winds are are also higher speed, it does not allow the clouds to go in a stately fashion and rain properly. So when it rains, it pours. And today we are seeing the impact in Assam, where uh, out of 45 million people, roughly 4.5 million, 10% of the population are negatively impacted by floods. And and then we have forest fires, because it is warm, it is hot, and then there are uh, the combustible material wood, and there are major forest fires all over the world, which is causing a loss of biodiversity. So, is this global warming in the future? The answer is no. It is today. So, let's talk about 5 things which are important for you to know. Number one, the CO2 concentration in the Earth's atmosphere today, I mean, today means this year, was 421 parts per million. Incidentally, it is the highest in 4 billion years. Since the advent of man, that is for the last 6,000 years, the CO2 concentration used to be around rock steady at 280 parts per billion. It would go up to 285, it would go down to 275, but up till 1850, it was 280. I mean, day in, day out, year in, year out, century in, century out. And then it started rising. So 280 went to 300, it went to 380 just 25 years ago, and already it is now at 421 ppm, parts per million. Highest sea acidification in 4,000 years. K means 1,000. Highest sea level in 3,000 years. Lowest glacier ice, that is in 2,000 years. And lowest polar ice, that is on Arctic and Antarctic, in 1,000 years. So in other words, global warming is here and now. Impact: because of the forest fires, roughly 100,000 natural species have become extinct. Because of acidification of the ocean. Now, what is acidification? Basically, the CO2 can be absorbed in water, and ocean keeps on absorbing CO2 in the atmosphere. So there is a loss of coral reefs and marine animals. And the United Nations in the Code Red survey has said that in the next decade and a half, which is just 2035, 3.5 billion people, which is roughly close to 40% of the global population, will be impacted by global warming. It will become very, very bad. Now, people don't think about extinction, but the planet Earth has already had 5 extinctions. When 96 to 98% of life was wiped out. The last happened 66 million years ago when a large chunk of an asteroid, about 1.8 kilometers in length, essentially hit the Gulf of Mexico and the Yucatan Peninsula of Mexico. And we had the last or the 5th extinction when the then dominant species dinosaurs became extinct and mammals started their life or their reign on earth in from 66 million years ago, leading to us humans today. But at the way we are going, if we go above 2.7 and 3 degrees, the earth unfortunately is looking at the 6th extinction. So I want to tell you a story of a frog, which is which is emblematic. Now there was a frog in a pan of water. It was cold and the water was being heated up very, very slowly. And this frog said, no problem, I can tolerate it. And it could have jumped out of the pan anytime, but unfortunately, it was boiled. In other words, it died. Now, human beings should not follow the example of that dead frog. So it is, I hope I am able to emphasize and re-emphasize that it is the greatest challenge facing mankind. So next slide, please. So having set the tone and having, I mean, if you agree, we have to do energy transition. And energy transition is also known by decarbonization. So this is the answer of the future. We have to decarbonize, and there are only 4 ways to decarbonize: renewable power, hydrogen, but sustainable hydrogen, CCUS, or carbon capture, utilization, and sequestration, and finally bioenergy. Now, bioenergy, why is it called renewable? Because the CO2 in the atmosphere had been absorbed and produced the biomass. And if we burn that as a fuel, we are putting that same CO2 back in the atmosphere. In other words, it is circular, it is cyclic, and hence we are not adding to the CO2 content in the atmosphere. So renewable power, there are only 5 sources: solar, wind, hydro, geothermal, and tidal. Solar, there are 2 ways: photovoltaic, which is 90% of solar power, and thermal. In wind, we can have onshore, which is on land, and offshore, which is on the sea. And remember, because the sea covers 70% of the earth, there are some charm to do offshore wind electricity. And now, the problem with renewable power is it is fluctuating. The sun doesn't shine in the night, the wind doesn't always blow, and hence we require a battery. It is a fundamental part of renewable energy in order to stabilize renewable power. So renewable power is the most important answer to decarbonization to sustainability, and it can lead to the electrification of the global economy. I'll talk about how much later on, some quantitative numbers. Next is hydrogen. Today also we make hydrogen. They are called gray and brown hydrogen. Gray via what is called steam methane reforming, and brown via gasification. Both are unsustainable because in order to generate hydrogen, you have a lot of emission, which is no good. So there are four grades of sustainable hydrogen. Green, and let's look at the table on the right hand side. The green hydrogen is water electrolysis using renewable power. The blue hydrogen is SMR, but then you capture the carbon and don't allow it to go into the atmosphere and sequester it underground. Turquoise, this is still in R&D phase. Basically, it is methane pyrolysis. And unlike SMR, the carbon doesn't come out as CO2 in order to pollute the atmosphere, but it comes out as carbon-carbon, which can be used for variety of usage. So that is turquoise, but it is not here today. And finally, we have gold hydrogen, which is if you do biomass gasification to make hydrogen, then that hydrogen is sustainable and called gold hydrogen. So today we have gray and brown hydrogen. Tomorrow we have to transition to green, blue, turquoise, or gold. Let's talk about carbon capture, utilization, and sequestration. Now we have to, this is required because uh, after we stop emitting CO2 in the atmosphere, incidentally, we are still increasing the emission. Forget slowing down or reducing the emissions. The world as a whole is increasing the emission. But even after we stop emitting, as I told you, CO2 has a lifetime of close to 500 years. So somehow we have to reduce or take out CO2 from the air. Now, the simplest way is afforestation or grow trees because it can take CO2 out of the atmosphere. But trees take a long time. Now, 5 times faster is if we grow algae, and in order to take out CO2 from the atmosphere. And once we have taken the CO2 out, either as trees or as algae or as CO2 we can sequester it in depleted oil and gas fields and salt caverns. So let's talk about bioenergy. And bioenergy has 1G, 2G, 3G, and 4G, where G stands for generation. So this is not telephone, but this is, or communication. This is bioenergy generation. Now, if you make fuel from food as a feed, it is first generation. And today, unfortunately, 96% of the biofuel comes from food as feed, which, we are all aware that between food and fuel, food is the most important priority. And hence 1G biofuel or bioenergy is unsustainable. Now 2G is from agricultural residue or forestry waste. Agricultural residue may be corn cobs, rice straw, wheat rice husk, wheat straw, those which are not used as food, and that is called the 2G or second generation. If we grow energy crops like algae, it is called third generation. And in future, we are saying that we should, instead of growing trees, we can mimic trees for photosynthesis to take carbon dioxide out. At the end of the day, uh, there are four and only four pathways: renewable power, hydrogen, carbon capture and sequestration, and bioenergy for decarbonization. So next slide, please. So let's talk about net zero. So energy transition will happen in two phases. Stopping emission is the first step, and it is grandly called as net zero. But after stopping emission, we still require carbon capture, utilization, and sequestration. So net zero means reduce GHG emissions to zero, and CCUS means direct CO2 capture from atmospheric capture, which is DAC. Now, emissions have three scopes. Scope one is manufacturing related. When you convert the raw material into product, you have some CO2 or methane emissions. Those are called scope 1 emission. The utilities used to convert raw material to manufacturing is known as scope 2 emissions. Now, the products, if you burn it as a fuel, which is what the refinery fuel products do, that is the scope 3 emissions. And in general, in a refinery like Jamnagar, the scope 1 emission is less than 10%. Scope 2 emission is less than 10%. But the real emission is the diesel, the gasoline, the jet fuel, because that causes the application, the burning of diesel, gasoline, and jet causes emission, and it is around 80%. So fossil fuel today, because it supplies 80% of the energy in the world, is the major cause of greenhouse gas emissions. So I have talked to you about decarbonization, and people are saying that the world will become roughly net zero in around 2050. But during that time, what will be the solution? So roughly 60% solution will be renewable power, roughly 20% is hydrogen, but not today's hydrogen, but low carbon sustainable hydrogen, and 15% will be carbon capture, utilization, and sequestration, and 5% bioenergy. So there may be a lot of proponents of bioenergy, but it is for the net zero, it is just a 5% solution. So the real solution is renewable power, which is already for generation competitive with fossil power, though battery cost is still 3 times higher than generation. And hence the great effort is how do we reduce the cost of battery in order to stabilize this fluctuating renewable power. Hydrogen, the good news is just like battery, there is a declining cost trend, and hopefully it will become competitive compared to today's unsustainable hydrogen within a decade or so. And that is what a lot of the people are, are betting on. Carbon capture is partly done when you are producing blue hydrogen, and that is an important way of carbon capture and sequestration. But right now, carbon capture and sequestration, though it was told that it is a form of reducing, but it is the highest cost for reducing CO2, and hence it is not going to happen in, I mean, it will happen, but it won't be a major solution till we come to around 2040s or 2050s. And bioenergy, it has been around for 20 years. There is a lot of research gone into it, but unfortunately, bioenergy is still uncompetitive. Now, 1G, that is food to bioenergy, is around 40% more expensive. 2G is around 2 times more expensive. And right now, there is no pathway of how do we reduce the cost of bioenergy in the future. And hence, it will continue to be, unfortunately, a niche solution. Now, let's talk about net zero. So 2050 is where the OECD countries, or so-called the rich developed world and the big emitters, they have said they will do net zero. China, the largest emitter today, roughly 1/4 of the CO2 emission is contributed by China. And they have said they will do it in 2060. India, unfortunately, uh, we talk a lot, but 2070 is when we have targeted net zero, which is too little, too late. And we are saying we will do it 2070 because we want to do it after China does it. Now, the oil and gas majors, most of them, the ExxonMobils, the BPs, the Shells of the world, they have wanting to become net zero in 2050. The automotive majors, that is car companies, they have said they will get net zero in 2040. And I'm really proud that in India, we have an oil and gas company, Reliance, which have declared that they want to become net zero by 2035. This shows the importance of sustainability in Reliance, which I think every other oil company should imbibe. So we need to accelerate decarbonization or energy transition to net zero because it is the first step in, in sustainability. And unless you take the first step, you cannot become sustainable. Okay, next slide, please. Okay, so you've heard a lot about it. So now I will summarize what is the future of oil and gas. And it will be a little bit quantitative, so please bear with me. So oil today is around 100 million barrels per day. And why have we done 2050? Because that is where most of the world uh, and most of the emitters have said they want net zero. So 2050 is our target. So that time, the oil and gas from roughly 100 million barrels a day will go down to 24 million barrels a day. In other words, there will be a 76% reduction in oil. Let's talk about gas. Gas today is 4 trillion cubic meters per year. And in 2050, now gas will keep on rising till about 2040, and then it will become 1.7 TCM, trillion cubic meter per year. That is the projection. So when is the oil demand going to peak? Surprisingly, it is going to peak within this decade. So sometime around 2030, give or take 2 years, between 2028 and 2030, the oil era will start declining, and the gas roughly 10 years later will start declining. And this is a must. This is non-negotiable, because unless it declines, we cannot hit net zero by 2050, which anyway some experts are saying is too little, too late. So what will happen to energy? So the oil will go down by, and this is exajoule per year. That is a common energy, uh, not million barrels or, but a common energy. So oil will decline by in the next 28 years, it will decline at roughly 5.1% per year. Of course, it may rise for the next 6, 7, 8 years, but thereafter, overall, it will decline by around 5% per year. Gas will decline a little slower because it is little less polluting, and it will decline by about 3% per year. And renewable will take up the slack and will go up by roughly 6.5% per year. The capex for oil and gas and coal will go down from 650 billion today to roughly 300 billion. Now, this is still required because there is still 25% oil and roughly 40+% gas, and you still require some oil and gas capex. But the renewable, which is just $250 billion per year, will go up to $750 billion per year. And if you notice, basically the capex, the energy will become more capex intensive, because it is easier to pump oil out of the ground and burn it. But because of renewable hydrogen, carbon capture, and bioenergy, it will become more capex intensive. Surprisingly, the total amount of energy consumed will remain roughly the same. In other words, the energy of the economy will not grow. Now, transport fuel, which today in a refining is over 70%, will go down to below 20%. Chemicals and durable polymers will become the major product from today's below 20% to over 70%. And the refineries will still produce, those that produce, they will produce lubricants, they will produce solvents, they will produce specialties, because that does not, I mean, they pollute, but much less. And remember, the lubricant used in an ICE, internal combustion engine, is just 1%. So it pollutes, but much less. Gas. What will happen to gas? We will produce hydrogen, and it is believed that in 2050, the majority of hydrogen, over 60%, roughly 65, will come from blue hydrogen. We are still awaiting technology breakthrough in turquoise hydrogen and gold hydrogen. It can be a balancing fuel, and that's why the demand peak has been shifted to 2040, roughly a decade after the demand peak of oil. So what will happen? How will we get hydrogen in 2050? And remember, this is sustainable hydrogen. So blue will be around 60-65%, green will be around 30%, and gold will be around 5%. So this, in short, in the next 20 years, oil and gas will become a sunset industry, and in 2050, we will have the epitaph of the oil and gas business. Next slide, please. And this is my favorite slide. Thank you for your extremely patient hearing. Anyway, you are all muted, so now you can ask any questions. But let someone coordinate the questions.
Sure, sir. Thank you, Doctor, for the outstanding session. Your perspectives were very refreshing. It indeed was exceptionally stimulating and informative. Very few people can express their passion for the subject and
thank you.
And you're one of them. So now let's move to the question and answer session, sir. I request participants to please unmute and ask your questions, please.
This is Dhanshekaran.
My name is Shekhar. I am Shekhar.
Yeah,
My name is
one
Shekhar.
at a time. One at a time.
Yeah, Shekhar, please.
Yeah, my name is Shekhar.
Yes.
Can I ask the question?
Please
Sure.
go on. Please go on, Mr. Shekhar.
Thank you, Mr. Maitra, for your wonderful talk. Really, I enjoyed. I enjoyed each and every line. See, my question is regarding fossil fuels. India is still depending on fossil fuels like coal, mainly coal. Coal India Limited is the main producer. Even Coal India Limited is importing because it's unable to manufacture the requirement of Indian requirement. But while fossil fuel is important, coal, we can think of coal gasification. So if you do gasification of coal, it has got also an environmental aspect. Environmentally, it can be safe. So what do you think of coal gasification?
Coal gasification is a bad idea because coal gasification, coal is the highest emitter and polluter. Coal gasification reduces pollution a little bit, roughly 20%, but 80% of the pollution is still very, very bad. Essentially, we have to get out of coal. It doesn't matter. I mean, today you may use it, tomorrow you may use it, but we have to completely plaster India, especially hot India, with solar panels, with wind turbines, and produce all the renewable power. Coal is either coal will survive and mankind will die, or mankind will survive and coal has to die.
Yeah, thank you. See, you are telling coal has to die, but India is much dependent on coal and fossil fuels. That's
it doesn't matter, because let me explain. We can in future get clean, sustainable hydrogen into India as ammonia in order to power. So don't depend on coal. So anyone which comes with coal as an answer, he is talking unsustainable, and it is bad. If today you can,
okay, I understand what you have said.
If today you can import LNG, if today you can import oil, tomorrow you can import hydrogen, tomorrow you can import ammonia, tomorrow, you can import other things which does not pollute. And it is important to have a mindset. Important to have a mindset that you have to get out of fuel and get into electricity.
Okay, I understand. what to say. But
Okay,
even in electricity batteries, now lithium batteries are coming. Old type of batteries will not suit.
No, battery, that is a talk for another day. What is the story on batteries and all? But today, we want to talk about the future of oil and gas, not batteries. And sometime Mr. Gopi will invite me to talk about what we are doing in renewable power, in batteries, carbon capture, and bioenergy. But that
Oh,
is a
very good.
talk
Nice.
for
See,
another
carbon capture and net zero.
Mr. Shekhar will come to you. Mr. Shekhar will come to you a little later.
Told very understanding in a very good manner. That is what I said. Nothing else.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you. Thank
Okay,
you.
sir.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Mr.
Thank you.
Shekhar.
Thank you for your response.
Mr. Ilongo, you can please ask your question, please.
Shekhar. Thank you.
Yeah, Mr. Srinivas, please unmute and ask your question, please.
Yeah, this is Srinivas from Bharat Petroleum. I would like to know your views on electrocatalysis to produce hydrogen for CO2 to chemical.
Yeah, in future, there will be a lot of ways to produce chemicals. But chemicals in general is not polluting. It is the fuels that are polluting. So if you make durable chemicals, there is no problem. And as long as it is used for a long time and not a one-time use or a single-use plastic, there are no issues with chemicals. But in future, chemicals will be made partly from fossil, partly from biomass, partly from recycled plastic waste, and other electrochemical routes as well. But that's all today in the R&D phase, and it is not here and now. So how will we make chemicals in the future? We will come to know of it, say, in the next 15 years.
Okay, thank you, sir.
Partha, this is Murthy here. I have 3 questions. Question number 1. So you talked about green hydrogen, you talked about blue hydrogen. So going forward, you mentioned about blue hydrogen is going to dominate around 65%. With all green hydrogen going to become less cost, do you think green will go higher or blue is going to take the part? That's question number 1. Question number 2, you talked about ammonia.
Let me answer one question at a time because my memory is not so good. So
okay.
Now today, the fossil hydrogen cost between $1 and $1.50 per kg of hydrogen. Blue hydrogen costs $2 a kg of hydrogen. Remember, this is in the LNG exporting countries, not in India. The green hydrogen today in the world globally cost around between 3.5 and 5.5. So let's say average of around 4.5. So today green hydrogen is far more expensive than blue hydrogen, but just like the battery cost have declined in the last decade. In fact, at the beginning of the last decade, it is shocking but true that the battery cost was $900 per kWh. Today, the same battery cost used in EV, lithium ion battery, cost $130 per kWh, 900 to 130. Similarly, people are saying that an electrolyzer looks and behaves just like a battery. So yes, if today's cost is 4.5, it will go down, but it has to go down in order to compete till it goes, and people are saying it will go below $2 also. But remember, if the gas declines, there will be more of gas supply and less of demand. So the gas prices, which today are stratospherically high because the demand has increased, and with limited supply. Tomorrow means 2 decades from now, when the gas declines, the gas prices will go down. So in other words, people are saying there will be a between healthy competition between blue and green hydrogen. But there are others in the wings because remember, this is 20-25 years, and humans' ingenuity, they can figure out many things. So we don't know. But as of now, the experts are saying in 2050, blue will win and green will be runners up. Now it can be green will be winner and blue can be runners up, but that is the plan.
Okay. The second question, you talked about ammonia injection to fossil fuel. So currently I'm working for a big project in one of the Japanese power company. Earlier I was injecting some wooden chips and etc. Now I have transferred to 30% of ammonia injection. The results, no, still I'm not able to get the result. Do you think that ammonia injection is going to take over the fossil fuels over a period of time?
Yeah, I think in 20 years, the major traded commodity will be ammonia. So all the ships will use ammonia as a fuel instead of marine bunker, and instead of gas-fired power plants, they will use ammonia for firing. In fact, 6 large gas turbine companies, they are working to produce this new generation gas turbine. And today, they have gone up to 50-50. That is 50% natural gas and 50% ammonia. Their goal is ultimately to go to 100%. They are not there yet, but there will be prototypes coming up in 2025, 2026, and by 2030, we will have 100% ammonia-fired engines. Today, you can buy an engine and have 50% ammonia, 50% natural gas, and it's going to work.
Thank you, sir. I have more questions. I will connect you one-on-one. I don't want to take others' time. Thank you, sir. Okay.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you, sir. Mr. Ramnathan. Ramnathan, please unmute and ask your question, Ramnathan.
Yes, sir. Thank you, Gopi, sir. My question is, with respect to ethanol blending in fuel, to what extent it can go up and to what extent of the supplies this ethanol blending will happen, for how long it will happen?
So, number one, ethanol blending, there are several countries. So first of all, you can have flexi fuel. Up to roughly 15% ethanol, there are no issues. If you can tweak the engine a little bit, you can go up to 70% and still have ethanol blended 70%, which Brazil, the only country in the world, has done. But now, let me tell you, ethanol is not the solution. If it comes now, most of the ethanol comes from either corn or from sugarcane. So in US it comes from corn, and in Brazil it comes from sugarcane. Now both corn and sugarcane are food products. Hence it is first generation biofuel. And anything where you convert food to fuel is a bad idea.
And with respect to renewable space, you're telling that it's the sunrise industry and 2050 till that it will grow at 6% CAGR, renewable space. Which are the top companies you think that will occupy that space in India, in the renewable space?
That's very hard to say, but we have aspirations for that.
What would be your contribution from renewable space for Reliance Industries in renewable space, vis-a-vis turnover in a decade's time or something like that? You have a plan?
It's hard to say, but basically, I mean, again, the next anyway, we plan to manufacture solar PV modules, number one, in India, and supply in India. Number two, we want to produce batteries for stationary batteries, grid batteries, and stabilize the renewable power supply. Number three is we want to get into hydrogen space, and especially green hydrogen, because we will be producing renewable power, and surplus renewable power we want to convert it into green hydrogen in order to decarbonize what are called hard to abate sectors, which are steel, cement, paper, glass, and refining. And finally, we want to also talk about fuel cells in order to make the so-called ubiquitous DG sets, diesel generator sets in India, obsolete.
Dr.
But
Maitra,
that is, again, as I told you, for another time, another day.
yeah, Dr. Maitra, this is Shankar here. Hello.
Yes, Mr. Shankar, please go on, sir.
Yeah, you see, recently a large project has been announced to make ethanol from bamboo, right? And there's a Finnish company, and this capacity is something like 200,000 liters per day or something like that. And this doesn't compete with the food-based, ethanol production. So they say that this bamboo can be grown at a much faster pace, and then the water requirement is also very low. And there is a lot of hype about this. What is your opinion?
This bamboo to ethanol is a good idea, because it is not first generation, it is second generation. Bamboo grows very well, so that is good. So everything is good except money. The cost of bamboo-based ethanol fuel is 2 times the cost of today's petrol without the taxes, and hence it is uneconomical. So we need to do it, but first try to reduce the cost.
Dr. Chiranjeevi, can you please ask your question, please?
Very good morning, sir. I'm Chiranjeevi from Bharat Petroleum Corporation. Sir, my question is after hearing the entire lecture, this oil and gas industry is having sunset in coming years by 2050s or later. But right now, if you look at all oil or gas industries, I'm talking mainly in R&D perspective. They're all working in conventional R&D and research and development and technologies supporting this oil and gas industry. So just I request your view. These R&D organizations, they should work continuously in these traditional research areas, or we have to stop them and we should reorient and only work on this new objectives of net zero and related projects.
Actually, the answer is very simple. The R&D is a long-term perspective. And if you look at the long term, the fossil energy is going to decline from 80% to less than 30%. In other words, if you have to go on R&D, you have to reorient your R&D to what is required in the future. So basically, you have to work on electrochemistry, because tomorrow, instead of oil as an energy, you will get electricity or electric power as the energy. So how can you do chemical synthesis with electric power? You have to do that. Second, you have to talk about membranes and diffusion technology, because at the end of the day, the batteries have lots of membranes and electrodes. The electrolyzer have lots of membranes and electrodes. And so you have to focus on that. You have to focus on hydrogen, that is low carbon hydrogen. How can you make it? So yes, you can continue with traditional research, but from 100%, you have to get it down to 1/3. And non-traditional research has to take its place of 2/3.
Thank you, sir. But one small question, sir. It is maybe in the lighter vein. Means in the, by 70s or 60s, all our refineries, they should close down. That is one thing. Or how we are going to sustain that particular thing, sir. You did not comment on that. I request if you can comment.
Actually, there was an implied answer in my slides. So let me explain. Today, 100 million barrels of oil is produced and refined. Tomorrow, or 2050, I say 24 million barrels. In other words, you can find out very simply that 1/4 of the refineries will survive, which are sustainable, which are use hydrogen and renewable power, which are less polluting in terms of emissions. And the remainder 75% will have a natural demise. So tomorrow, the refineries will be known by what is called their ESG score. And E for environmental means what is the emissions per ton of products that you are making. And that is scope 1 emission, scope 2 emission, and scope 3 emission. If you cannot survive, you have to close down. So the answer was implied when I say it goes down to 24, 25. It may not be 25. It may be 30 or 40, but still it is a long ways down from 100 million barrels today.
Okay, thank
Mr.
you, sir.
Murthy,
Thank you so much.
Mr. Murthy, sir, can you please unmute and ask your question, sir?
Okay, unmute. Okay, unmute. Okay, I have a question now. The gentleman who was asking about, there is a sunset in 2025 for refineries. So I am giving another perspective. See, you are worried about 2025. I am worried about now. You see companies like Worley or Petrofac or Technip, those companies, if you see their profile, they totally moved into energy transition. They are in the business of doing complete on CCUS or in the H2 or in the ammonia business. Now they change. Considering like what Mr. This gentleman told, see, these people are all going for complete energy transition. As Partha told, they are all going to energy transition. The entire design companies are going for that. So the refineries are going to be the same change, and it's going to be a big boom for oil and gas industries. Oil and gas and power are going to merge together, and there is going to be a big boom for energy professionals. That's my view.
Thank you, sir. Mr. Murthy, sir, please unmute and ask your question, sir.
Yeah, looking to the bleak future of the refinery, you think the refineries which are planned in Tamil Nadu, like Nagapattinam or like Kadalur or like Tuticorin, is it possible that these refineries will take off, or it is only still in the planning stage? Thank you.
Most refineries, they are planned for 20-25 years of life. And today we are in 2022. 25 years of life means so if it is in the planning and project stage, and if it has not started construction, I think these refineries have missed the bus. But if they have started construction, they can continue and finish it and add as a refining capacity. But today, to start planning for new refinery, which will start, let's say, 5 years from now, say 2027, 2028, it doesn't have 25 years before 2050. Hence, we have to think twice, 3 times, 4 times before we invest in a new refinery. It is a lot better to invest in sustainable energy field. In fact, what one of the person said, that the electricity and fuels will merge and become a common energy field, and there will be a huge number of applications. So tomorrow it will not be the computer application which will predominate, but it will be the energy applications which will predominate. It will be for innovative thinking, for lateral thinking, and thinking out of the box.
Thank you, sir.
Can I ask a question?
Yeah, please.
Yeah, Dr. Mitra, your colleagues earlier were looking at solid absorbers for CO2 capture. That is one thing. Second is enzyme, this algae route for hydrogen. Are we making any headway in these two?
We are still in R&D phase. We haven't. We are still investing money to do research and development. We haven't invested money for a real project yet. But again, this can be taken up on what we are doing on sustainability at a future forum.
Sure, yeah, sir. Actually, the corollary to that question is that the other way than doing solid absorbent is to ensure that the gases which are lean in CO2 are made into strong concentrated stream by using appropriate membrane technology, using, of course, some pressure. So that will make it more viable. Is there anything being done on that?
Yeah, in fact, remember CCUS, the first CC stands for carbon capture. And there is absolutely a profusion of people all over the world trying to develop better, more energy efficient method of carbon capture. So let me explain with numbers. Today, if you do carbon capture and sequestration, the cost is roughly $150+ per ton of CO2. Out of 150, unfortunately, about $80 to $100, that means the majority of the money is in carbon capture. So in order for CCUS to become effective and a sustainability solution, we have to reduce the cost of carbon capture. But it has to go down from, let's say, 80, 90 today to 20, 30 tomorrow. And everyone, I mean, you name a university, you name a company, they are all working at it, but no answers yet. In fact, if you find out someone who can do carbon capture at 1/3 of today's cost, please let me know.
We will talk on offline later on.
Thank you, sir. Mr. Samarjit?
Yes, sir. Sir, I have basically two questions. First one is that considering this Russia-Ukraine war, we are seeing most of the European countries are going back to the conventional fossil fuels, like many of the coal-fired power plants also coming into operation. So how do you see that? Is it going to be like 2050 net zero target going to be fulfilled?
If you
And
no, remember this is a 28-year journey up to 2050, and you are talking about EU. Now EU has a target, but the target is for 2050, 2035, and 2030. And 2030, the target of the EU is actually a brilliant target. Is called Fit for 55. What does Fit for 55 means? It means that EU as a whole wants to reduce their emission down by 55%. That is a noble goal, and that is in 2030. Today, whatever, it may go up and down, but is EU changing their Fit for 55 target for 2030? The answer is no. And do you think this Ukraine war will last till 2030? The answer again is no. So this, you should never change something. I mean, you should never confuse tactical with strategic. Strategic wise, they still want to reduce emission. Today, tactically, they may increase a little bit, but at the end, we'll have to see whether they implement net zero by 2050 and Fit for 55 by 2030.
okay, so another question is that as you have described in the slide that scope 3 emission. So from that, I understand the petrochemical units doesn't have any scope 3 emissions. So considering that, I would like to know what is the significance of plastic recycling in the approach of net zero?
Okay. It's a good question, but let me explain the significance of plastic recycling. Now, remember I said ESG will dominate in the future. S for ESG is social or societal. Now, in fact, plastic is causing an enormous, it is not causing CO2 pollution, but it is causing enormous pollution on land and water. In fact, right now, they believe there is more plastic in the oceans than the marine creature. That, as you can rightly say, is not sustainable. Now, in order to remove that, there are three ways. One is landfill, but land is not produced anymore. And so landfill in the long term for plastic waste is unsustainable. Now, the other is plastic burning to form energy. It is definitely unsustainable because if you burn plastic waste, you will produce, yes, a little bit of power, but a lot of emissions, which is unsustainable. So if landfill is unsustainable, if incineration to produce power is unsustainable, if waste plastic littering the countryside and the oceans is unsustainable, you have to, I mean, again, repeat, have to recycle plastic waste.
Mr. Ramesh, can you please unmute and ask your question?
Sir.
Good morning, sir. My appreciation to Partha sir for all the views, sir. While appreciating and accepting most of your views, I want you to talk a bit on transition because from now we are in the peak of our fuel requirements and maybe 2030 or 2040 will be starting our decline. But during the period, the fuel demand is continues to grow and we require refiners to invest But knowing that it is a sunset industry, how will you ask industrialists to invest in refineries? Knowing that they are coming very late, they will not be having the payback. So what are your thought process in this regard?
No. On refinery, India is in a good shape because India is a surplus in refinery products. And hence, you don't have to invest in more refineries in order to continue. Second, there are existing assets which can be considered to be converted to biorefinery. That is the 5% solution of bioenergy. That is item 2. Item 3 is, instead of producing fuels, a lot of the refineries can look at increasing the chemicals. Today, chemicals is less than 20%. Tomorrow, chemicals will be more than 70%. So refining doesn't always means fuels. You can still think of a lube refinery. So it is very simple. You have to ask the question, is this business going to continue in 2040, 2045, and 2050? If it continues, you can invest. If it doesn't continue, please do not invest.
Mr. Paswan, can you please unmute and ask your question, please?
Yes, sir. Yeah. Thank you, sir. It's a great oversight and hope things will move. I have kept my question, most of the questions, almost 9 questions in the chat box. So I will hope that those questions will be later on answered. Only the question I want to put maybe a little out of context, but very much contextful. That may be the case, like, see, we are talking the technicality, scientific way of talking, but somewhere we may be, as a whole world community, we may be missing to the society how to touch and bring the society together. I mean to say, suppose as an engineer, when I buy one car, we go for another 2 cars, 3 cars, and 1 house, and so much. That kind of thing. And sir told in the very beginning of the presentation that the AC requirement, hope that AC is, most of the AC are personal use. AC requirement taking the overall energy consumption around 1/3 of the world energy. I don't know what is the status of India. Definitely it will be very low. I would like to just put the question forward, whether the equitable development as a world, or when we are confining ourselves to the country, which is very tough to confine, equitable development or equitable distribution of the resources to the society will give a very, very sustainable future. On your take, sir, on this, on your take. Hope I have asked question clearly. I don't know. Thank you, sir. Thanks.
Okay, that's a good question. And India, in fact, in these like the Glasgow summit, which happened very recently, we brought up exactly the same equitable development of sustainable solution in the world. And unfortunately, the answer is bad. Why is it bad? Now, in 2011, in the Copenhagen summit, this is the summit. Essentially, they said that the polluting countries or the rich countries have to transfer resources to the less developed countries and the non-polluting countries. Now, India, of course, does pollute, but much below the per capita. But more important, there are, I mean, the whole continent of Africa is in bad shape because of the, I mean, it has not polluted, but it is still in bad shape. So at Copenhagen, 2011, they said that the United Nations should transfer roughly $100 billion per year from the developed countries to the developing thing. And this was supposed to be completed in 10 years. And unfortunately, there was a summit in Glasgow in November 2021. Exactly 10 years ago, in 10 years, the rich countries have not fulfilled the promise of climate equity or climate and development equity. They have increased it to 80 billion, and they have not gone up to this famous 100 billion promised 10 years ago. And because in 10 years there has been more pollution, the real money required now is in excess of $500 billion per year. So in other words, you are right that equity business is not followed in the sustainability solution, and that is sad.
Sir, just added to that, that is the world level talk. We are the developing country, and less developed country are talking to the developed world to have some more contribution for that, because we are developing. Now, as a nation, same thing should apply to the rich people and the poor people. In this regard, anything is happening, and what we see nowadays, the business and ethics is fighting with each other. Any steps are being taken to have some marry between the ethics and business, and confidence of the business should be having that yes, ethical business is the beautiful business and can be done, and it will flourish like anything.
Actually, the world is trying to do that, and it is called ESG accounting. Right now, EU has taken a lead in that, which is called E stands for environmental, S stands for social or societal, and G stands for governance. In other words, just like your credit card score, tomorrow they are saying all companies will have an ESG score. And if they have to borrow funds from the bank or from financial institution, they have to have a high ESG score. In other words, if your E score is low, in other words, if you are polluting, then your E score will be low. Societal, if you are damaging the society, that means you are not improving the social, the society, then again, your S score will be low. And governance is if you are cheating or if you don't have a diverse board or management committee, your G score will be low. So we don't have an ESG score in India yet, but it is just like we adopted Bharat 1 or Bharat 6 environmental norms patterned on Euro 6 environmental norms. Similarly, once the ESG score is made in EU countries, I'm more than hopeful that we will have ESG scores in India as well.
Okay, sir. Thank you very much. Every time we are looking for the Western country, no step we are taking from our side. Anyway, thank you very much. Thank you very much.
On the Paswan, let me explain very simply. Now, the whole world is changing. We want, you have to reduce the cost of hydrogen. You have to reduce the cost of battery. You have to reduce the cost of electrolyzer. You have to reduce the cost of carbon capture. What are you doing in India to make these things happen? Which universities, which companies are working on that? So give me a break. You have to have innovation breakthroughs in order to be the leader in the world.
Yeah, right. You said, sir, because our industry and the institution are having almost zero communication with each other. Anyway, sorry, sir. Thank you.
Srinivasan, do you still have a question? Yeah, Mr. Yuvarajan, please go on.
Sir, good afternoon. I'm very thankful to you for the valuable information sharing for the past 2.5 hours. It's all you are providing us the recent trend and future global situation in the fuel. I need to ask one of the clarification from you. For all the domestic cooking purpose and other thing, LPG is the major fuel. But in your earlier presentation, that this is also one of the polluting fuel. Please guide us in due course of time. What will be the replacement for this LPG fuel? But our country is taking more steps to provide LPG supply to most of the rural areas. But alternatively, by 2050 or 2070, this will get replaced. In this situation prevails, our country is hugely populated. Please guide us. What will be the alternate fuel for this, please?
So you asked the question on cooking fuel. We don't have an answer, but basically the thing will divide into two parts, urban India and rural India. So in urban India, LPG will shift from LPG to natural gas, which is slightly less polluting, but thereafter to hydrogen, which is non-polluting. In the rural India, on the other hand, LPG will not be there. Instead, it will be renewable power, and renewable power will be used for lighting and other things. And a part of it will be converted to hydrogen in order to have it as a cooking fuel. So ultimately, the cooking fuel in India will be either electric stove in rural India and some hydrogen stove, or hydrogen stove in urban India.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
Last question, Mr. Sanjay, can you please unmute and ask your question, please?
Yeah, thank you, sir. Thank you, Dr. Partha, sir. It was an excellent lecture. A presentation, the bandwidth, from the big picture to the smallest details, all covered in few slides and just in this 1 hour discussion, sir. And sir, congratulations to your company, sir, for the vision 2035. Regarding that same year, sir, 2035, you also mentioned that 40% of the global population will be negatively impacted by global warming. That means disproportionately or negatively impacted. And you pointed out, yes, it's an issue of awareness, education, implementation, all these issues. But what you now mentioned is that $500 billion, the developed countries have to pass it on to the developing countries. And there is a faltering in that. So which means, does it mean that the code red is going to become redder? Just to...
Yeah, in fact, it is very, very bad. So red will become, I don't know, double red or whatever. And the reason, let me explain. In order to go net zero in 2050, you can't magically one day turn everything net zero. So you have to slowly, what is called, it is like the COVID curve. You have to bend the curve. Now, today, the CO2 emissions are still rising. And when I say CO2, I mean greenhouse gas emissions. So, bending the curve means that in 2030, which is just 8 years from now, in order to reach net zero in 2050, you have to reduce the CO2 emissions in 2030. And how much? You have to reduce by around 15%. Doesn't sound a lot, but you have to do 15% in order to have 100% reduction by 2050. But today, the best projection shows that forget reducing by 20% or 15 or 20%, it will actually go up to by around either between 10 and 20%. Because in order to reduce the curve, you have to reduce the usage of coal. You have to reduce the usage of oil. You have to, gas can still continue a little bit, but you have to definitely reduce the usage of coal and usage of oil. And right now, they are not, the curve is not bending. In fact, right now it is bending, or the peak is beyond 2030, which implies that it will be very difficult to hit a net zero in 2050. And unless we hit net zero in 2050, our Earth is in dire straits.
And to add to that are the uncertainties introduced by the pandemics and like wars and other things which in future. So thank you, sir. Thank you for that excellent presentation.
Thank you very much, sir. Now, may I request Mr. N.S. Murthy to say a few words before we conclude?
Very good afternoon to all of you, and really thankful to Dr. Maitra for having accepted this. I was a little worried because Reliance, we know very well that sometimes they say that why you want to teach others. Dr. Maitra has been always an excellent teacher, I could state about. And I still remember the very nice interactions I used to have with him over the years during my short stay in Reliance. And another most important which I find is that Dr. Maitra says that he is going to give one more lecture to us about, he has now thrown the problem to all of us. Now he says that what he is going to do to get the 2035 energy neutral, or this carbon neutral. And I'm looking forward to hear that soon, Dr. Maitra. And once again, Gopi, you have been doing wonderful work, and you are able to pull all the people, and I'm sure many more people will learn about. And another most important thing which I want to tell all our friends who are watching this is that believe in yourself, and I'm sure new ideas will come, and maybe India will lead the rest of the world in the oil technology, Americans and maybe French. These are the two guys led the rest of the world. Maybe in the biomass related work and how you are going to make energy neutral. I'm 100% sure that people like P.T. Murthy and all the people, even Ramamari is also listening to us. I'm sure there are many more scholars who are listening to us. We can make a difference. Don't worry about what is gone is gone. At least we can make a new beginning and get going. So once again, Dr. Maitra, you are excellent and thought-provoking presentation to all of us. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, sir. So thank you very much, Dr. Partha Maitra. Thank you for being with us today. We had an excellent session, and
thank you for inviting me, and thank you, for giving me the opportunity. And if I've been able to convey the seriousness of the issue, I feel happy.
We are honored, sir. We are honored to have you with us today, sir. Thank you very much, sir.
Thank you, Dr. Maitra.